Alright, this is my first video on Surds, so I'm just going to keep things basic. There will be other videos with more challenging stuff. So we're just going to look at how we're going to manipulate Surds in this video here. Now, the first things first, let's go down to the rules. Well, there are only two rules to remember. Rule number one is simply this. If I have two numbers multiplying by each other and they're both being square rooted, then that's the same as the square root of one number times the square root of the other number. Okay, now this doesn't apply to just square root. It could be cube roots or any other roots that you have, but I'm just going to say square root because I'm just going to use the square root for now. The other rule is just as likely if two numbers are dividing by each other, it is the same as the square root of one number divided by the square root of the other number. So that's all you really need to remember, to be honest. Some people might want to start thinking about the square root of two numbers adding, and I should put you out of your misery now to say that that is not the same as the square root of one number added to the square root of another number. So please do not do that, okay? So this is an absolute no-no. Don't do it. Just focus on those two things. If those two things are not happening, then you're going to be fresh out of luck. Okay, let's put it to good use. So, for example, if I have, let's just say the square root of 12 divided by the square root of 3, and then see how we can simplify that. Well, this is where it now starts getting technical, because you're going to have to use the language that the maths that you have within you. Now 12, I know it's got a square factor. The square factor is 4. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to split 12 up, and I'm going to say that that's the square root of 4 times 3. And then I have my root 3 at the bottom. Now if you remember rule number one, they're multiplying at the top, so I can separate them. So square root of 4 times the square root of 3, all of that divided by the square root of 3. You can clearly see here now that cancels that, leaving me with just the square root of 4, which we know is 2. Pretty straightforward. I can also have another situation where I have got let's have another one, square root of 12, something that's not going to behave as nicely maybe. So square root of 12 divided by the square root of 2. Alright, well, here we go. Well, a way that I can do this straight away, so I'm going to do it sort of different to the one I did above, because the one above could have been done simpler, so I'm going to do this one simpler and show you another way you could have done it. So this obeys rule number 2, so I can do 12 divided by 2, which is going to be the square root of 6. And I can leave it at that because 6 doesn't have a square factor, so my answer is just the square root of 6. That is it in its exact form, and that's it. Alright, good. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it up a notch. Alright, look at this bad boy threatening to give you grief. But it's not so scary. If you do it wrong, then it becomes scary. So let's do it sort of a more difficult way first. So I'll call this method 1. Okay, I can deal with the numbers first because these are multiplying by the square root. So I can do 4 times 2, that gives me 8. And then I can say that 24 and 5 obeys law number 1. So I can do square root of 24 times 5 if I wanted. And then that would give me 8 times the square root of 120. Well, I don't know about you, but I really don't want to be doing that, especially in an exam where I don't have use of a calculator. I'd much rather make my life a lot easier and use my times table. So I'm going to now introduce methods. So I'm going to leave this one here. I can probably show you the answer straight away, which should be 16 root 30. But what I'm going to do is I'll show you the way I normally work work this out. So I'm going to go method 2 here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go from this section here. Go for this section here. Okay, so I'm going to keep that. I'm going to keep the 8 square root of 24 times 5. And look at what I'm going to do. I'm going to try and find square factors of 24, and then I'm going to split it up. So I'm going to say that this is the square root of, well, I know 6 times 4 is 24, and then I've got my times 5 there still hanging out. And then what I'm going to do now is I'm going to obey rule number 1, and I'm going to take out only the bits that I want. So rule number 1 says if they're multiplying, I can basically square root each of them individually. So I will just take out the square root of 4 because I need it. And I'm going to keep 6 times 5 in the brackets because they're no use to me. They're not square numbers, so they're not going to help me out in any way. So this becomes 8 times the square root of 4 is 2 times the square root of 6 times 5 means the square root of 30. And then I can just do 8 times 2 is 16 root 30. And it really is as simple as that. Alright, keeping things nice and basic, I'll probably look at one more problem just, on a basic level, and then we're going to stop. Alright, you might look at this and you might think, I'm just going to jump straight in and start messing around with it, but I would advise that you don't do that. I would more suggest writing things in a way that you can easily see what the answer is going to be straight away. Don't be too quick to expand anything. So I'm going to keep my 6 root 2 times 2 root 8. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to write it in a fraction sort of way, 3 root 8, because it makes it so much easier to see things. Now, if you see what I see, then you should straight away see that root 8s are going to cancel out. You should also see that this 3 will cancel into this 6 2 times. And it's pretty simple now for you to see that this 2 will multiply by that 2, thereby giving you 4. And the root 2 has got no friends to work with him anymore, and it just stays there on its own now. And that's the answer in its exact form, as simple as that. Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed the beginning of Surds. It does get more challenging than this, but look out for other videos on that. Alright, fantastic.